to partially close the door just for our work committee.
Is the plan, Megan, to swap David out?
If you all are good with that, I mean, I think it would likely that instead else. That was weird.
Up here on there.
Okay. Oh, okay. I didn't hear what was sign online.
Sorry.
Do we? There we go. Okay, well, it's 10:02. We'll call the Housing Committee of the Thomas County Industrial Development Agency to order. We're meeting here in the IED offices. We have with us Nels and Megan, myself. We also have David from the County Planning Department. Duxon has let us know that he's going to be a few minutes late and unsure of Jerry at the moment. Okay. I guess first, if I can just maybe take a point of privilege, we'll so Megan, now that we have David on at the county, and sorry, David, to talk about you in front of you. In David's role as Housing and Community Development Director. The thought of switching Megan's membership on the committee out with David, because this work aligns perfectly with David's work plan, and it can allow Megan to get back to the work of the deputy director. Does anybody have any objection to that?
I think it's a natural fit.
Okay, is this something we could just do and then inform the IDA that our membership composition has changed?
I don't know what your official process is, so.
Rich John just sort of put these together as chair of the IDA, right?
Right, we nominate them at the beginning of the year, so I think that we can just make that recommendation at Wednesday's meeting, that's the recommendation of the committee, and ask for the blessing,
Right.
that's what.
Yeah, and so David would also be overseeing the project in 2026, where we were talking about, combining the IDA money, CDBG and such, kind of a bigger housing effort. So it seems like since IDA's money is involved, you would probably like direct
Yes,
onto it.
absolutely.
So,
Yes.
Okay, so if we could plan to make, or I don't know if we need something formal put together for Wednesday's meeting, or if I can just suggest it as a motion. But we'll plan to do that.
Yes,
and we're colleagues, so if there's anything I can be helpful with, I'm always happy to.
sure, sure.
Okay, well, that's great. So, does anybody have any other items for the agenda before we move through? No? Okay. The housing demand study revisit. Kelly, I'm assuming that this was part of our conversation that we had offline about additional funds coming from the IDA to support
Yes,
this activity.
yes.
So as we're going through the county's housing, or as we're going through the county's budget, the additional funds for the housing demand study came up for discussion. I genuinely feel that there's strong belief from the legislature that it's a worthy investment, but just based on budget constraints, Rich John had mentioned that maybe we want to consider going back to the IDA. Is it a fund balance, or what's the fund that we have at the IDA?
Just the general funds that we have.
The general fund, which is healthy in nature, and asking for additional 25,000 to come from the IDA. And David, maybe you could fill us in on the is it a CDBG grant that the county applied for?
Yeah, so we applied for $50,000 in CDBG funds with the match being 50,000 from the IDA that you were already planning for a housing demand study and 25,000 from the county that we were asking for as an enhancement in the 2026 budget. So that conversation seemed to be going well, but then it is very tight at the county. And I think there was the thought that there's funds available here, perhaps easier than in this year's county budget.
It was kind of the spirit is willing, but the funds are tight. So I think at the county's ends, if this works for the IDA.
Nels, do you see any?
It's not an IDA decision. It's not.
Oh, I mean, yeah, well, I think we have to recommend it.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. I think we haven't really devised what exactly the study fully is going to try to accomplish, right? That work plan was developed and then kind of set aside for a while, right?
We have a draft scope that was enough to inform the grant application, but the next step, assuming we're successful with the grant, would be to draft an RFP for a consultant that includes a full scope. And
Is the draft scope something that could be shared with the IDA as it considers the additional funding?
Sure.
Yeah, do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So is that something you need for Wednesday, for the Wednesday meeting? Is
it ready?
I mean, we have like what we had proposed in the CDBG application. So it's not a scope in terms of like, it's not at the ready to put out an RFP for consultant level, but just kind of where we explain the concept to CDBG, the CDBG folks. I will say with a very specific angle because they are very confined with what they can fund. And so one key person was very enthusiastic about, he was understanding the bigger bang for their buck, that they care about the LMI population and they cannot fund anything that's not directly tied really there. Like that's what they want to focus on. I think they got that we're saying put this together because doing things individually is inefficient. And together we're all going to go further with the money joined. So
their funds can pay for a certain part of the work.
And line us up for grants for that help that particular population the way they are able to in the future. So it's written a little bit with that angle, but I think it still works.
Right.
And you can
so
see
their
the
funds
picture.
would cover work that lines us up for future grant applications to CDBG. All CDBG funds are dedicated to low and moderate income households. So in order to successfully apply for CDBG funds, you have to have an up-to-date housing needs assessment and housing conditions assessment, which is something that we kind of do every once in a while. The last one we have is from 2016. We've kind of been getting like you're skating by on the kind of end tail of this current information. So by putting this all into one study, we can do the things that they want, the things that are more market oriented, they all work together. And that's the goal, is to keep it holistic instead of having it be parceled out into different programs.
So maybe then, because it sounds like maybe instead of a written document, David, are you available on Wednesday?
Yeah.
Just pop upstairs and if there's any questions or things, we can invite David to participate.
Yeah, that would be great.
Kelly, just since I know we haven't really talked for a while, some of the other things that are kind of cooking in our region is I had connected with the Syracuse and Central New York folks. And so the state has thrown a considerable amount of money their way. They funded their big housing market analysis.
Oh, great.
There are not one, but it looks like two funds that are going to be rolling out very shortly. Supporting housing, of course, they cut Central New York off at Portland County, not us. And I had one guy that does not have the power. He's like, you should be in. I'm like, yes. It's like, I'm not the boss. Darn it. So anyway, I think like us having this fresh look will be really helpful.
Definitely.
My hope is like we can get those coattails like coming down our way a bit more, because if they're real dollars, the Southern Tier 8 organizations also, they've got some ARC money and they're working on some sort of study, but I think they also recognize the need for some kind of fund, something to try to help with the capital stack and things like that. But it's like, instead of all of us like recreating wheels, if somebody's already gotten a lot of state investment, like, and we've got great data and we're showing like all of the things that we can do at the local with local levers versus where we need like the state or the ARC money sort of thing. So we're hoping like this can help connect these things pretty well too. 'Cause-
ARC money comes through STA, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're the conduit, you know, and they're, I mean, I think all of us, we feel like we're all in quicksand right now at the federal level.
Mhm.
And then how that affects all the state pieces and what CDBG even looks like next
Right.
year, things. But I think without anything definitive, we're just kind of moving along and hoping it'll be there when we need it. And if it's not for a while, we've got, as soon as the faucet's back on, hopefully have things in place and know what we can do at the local level as well with our local partners meantime. So.
Yeah, we were able to access the 2025 CDBG funds, so at least, you know, last year's one.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's good. Anything like, we're fine right
We
now.
applied for it is 2025 funds
Okay.
because of the way it comes to the state first.
Yeah.
And
It's
then,
2026 that,
yeah.
I mean, the state's been saying they've been having a rush because everybody's kind of acting like this is it. So get it while you can.
So how soon do you think that you would receive those funds?
I expect that we will know relatively soon because it's a
Okay.
rolling
Okay, oh, that's
application
good.
process now. Definitely by the end of the year.
Good,
Yeah.
okay.
And it's a tight timeline for it's 13 months from award to completion.
So what do you think the timeline realistically is for the housing demand study then?
I would expect that we'll know by the end of the year and we'll jumpstart with RFP in January or February. So it would be, I think the demand study portion of it, I think can be towards the front. So we would have it complete by June, I would guess.
Okay. Any other discussion on housing demand study revisit? No?
Well, I did like aspects of studies I've seen in the past, like your snapshot, look at kind of income and housing expenses and look at that kind of relationship because we've had some pretty healthy income growth. It's kind of uneven. I think if I look at the numbers right, that I think that per capita is doing better than the median, maybe suggesting maybe people are doing better at the top end. And that there's a group, you know, maybe at the lower end, it's not doing as well, but I think that analysis is helpful to look at that trend line and see, now, are we getting less affordable or more affordable? And you just can't look at housing alone, you gotta look at the income as well and see where things are. So I like that connection that was done in that snapshot update. And the fact that median incomes can be measured 4 or 5 different ways in terms of whether you're talking about families or households or renters, and I think that's important to keep in mind too when we're looking at households. I also think that I think tracking household counts is maybe more important than tracking populations. Because we're
There's been
seeing-
some real changes.
Yeah, the average household size is declining. So you're in a steady population, I still have demand for more housing units. To get more.
So you're very timely and we did not pay out in a way because of the housing the newest housing snapshots in draft form and we're working on and probably getting out for some early review fairly soon. Yeah, so that was part of, we thought, since we're doing that work, we're not going to pay a consultant to do all of that. So like we can like use that as some of the baseline data.
That's great.
Consultant doing and get more bang for our buck.
And one of the interesting takeaways from that is that our population has been relatively flat, but since 2018, we have a 9% increase in households. And households need houses. So
It's amazing because I remember when we did the last housing needs assessment and consultants like, you guys can't go any lower. And it's like, oh, yes, we can.
yeah.
So
are we then retaining young people in the market, or what would be the explanation for that change, right? Are we graduating them from living at home to living on their own, or is it just the
I wish I
change
could
in-
say that I think we're getting seniors moving here
Interesting.
is.
and I think seniors don't move out as much as they used to as well. So they may become empty nesters, but they don't retire.
So it's on the other end of the family spectrum.
Because we're 80.
The 65 plus age bracket is the only one with a growing number of people.
Wow.
And that may also be a little bit contributing to like the cost burden side of things for homeowners, because I think if you tell people that homeowners are less cost burden, everybody's always like, it's so hard to buy a house here. It's like, yes, if you want to be a new home buyer, it can be pretty tough. But if you're an older homeowner
If you come
Right.
with cash and equity.
and you bought at the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or refinanced at the right time or things. It's the costs are different. And now we've seen like, it also means you don't necessarily, you may need flood insurance, but I know a lot of seniors in my neighborhood just went ahead and finished paying their houses off so that they didn't have to take on flood insurance costs.
Right. But then that's even harder for someone else to buy it.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, any future buyer is going to have to be able to do both things.
Right.
Well, can't wait for the study to come out.
We'll
Well, the group.
have a not so happy hour afterward.
Ironically, as housing prices have increased, for sale housing prices have increased,
Yeah.
the percentage of homeowners who are cost burden has decreased.
Mhm.
Because it's probably a lot of people who purchased 20 years ago.
It's very hard. It's also very hard to purchase and be cost burdened because metric for being cost burdened, it's also the metric for lending. So a bank's not going to give you a loan that would leave you cost burdened.
Right.
Because you wouldn't be a good creditor.
Borrow. Interesting.
Or you buy into something that unfortunately you find out needs like major repairs pretty immediately.
Right.
Gary sends his apologies. He had a family emergency and will not be able to make it.
No worries, understand. And the first. Dustin, welcome.
Apologies.
No worries, no worries, no worries. We've assigned you all of the tasks. As I was told was the idea for people who were late. And I was thankful I wasn't late. Just to bring you up to speed, we did talk about real quick, the county's budget process and the tight financial situation that we find ourselves in these years. Maybe going back to the IDA and asking for an additional $25,000 to put into the housing study. So that would be 75,000 from the IDA and then 50,000 from a CDBG grant that the county applied for, plus the work that the county is already contributing to the snapshots. Right, is that what we're doing?
And David largely supervising this.
And David's
We're-
time to supervise.
We are anticipating a substantial amount of staff time in addition to the consulting, because we're not going to get for this budget, we will not get everything we want if we just let a consultant.
Yeah.
Go solo.
So that'd be about 125,000, but the request came to the legislature where there was interest to support. But also the question came up, can the IDA do a little bit more based on the IDA's available funds? So just wanted to get your initial thoughts. See if it makes sense to have a discussion on Wednesday.
Yeah, I think the need for information remains the same, despite the economic climate, maybe even more so. So I'm game, as long as Kelly thinks it's okay.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing was with David's new role, swapping Megan and David out on the committee as county representatives. So Megan can get back to her work that she was designed to be doing at the top of the organization, and David can plug in on the housing front.
The county, I hold both of them in high esteem. So
I appreciate getting to see, getting to talk with you all, and I'm always available for it.
And Russ, can we just confirm that to make that change, this is an ad hoc committee of the IDA. So the request would be to swap out David West, who is the, remind me of your title, Housing
And Community Development Director.
Housing and Community Development Director, onto the IDA Housing Committee.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. I would just advise the board at Wednesday's meeting, that's what's happening.
Okay, do we need their approval or just say that that's
You don't need their formal approval, but it can't hurt to make it part of the record.
Okay,
Sorry about being late. I just had some weird Google invite that I clicked on. I just was looking at myself, so.
sorry about that.
It's all right. Yeah, no, that's not a problem. But I would just let the board know that this, took place and make it part of the meeting minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Liz. All right, so we'll move on to number 3 then, policy review. This is sort of the meat and potatoes of the conversation. And I don't know how we want to kick this off. I know we have some experienced housing minds in the room, and we have the elected officials. I don't know where we want to take it from here, or how best to address this, but I guess I just kind of leave it open-ended for anybody to jump in. And Kelly has provided some IDA housing policy comparisons. I guess I can just quickly run through those. It looks where there's Tompkins up at the top. Broome County does pilots up to 22 years with
Their policy is very convoluted.
okay, so we're awaiting clarification. So
Yes.
we won't highlight them.
No.
Cortland has no policy through the IDA. Onondaga has market rate for a pilot of three years, 25, 50, 75. I'm guessing as a phase in of new taxes.
Yep.
Workforce, they have it 10 years at 80% and 120% of AMI. 10% of the units at or below 80% of AMI gets 10 years. And workforce for a pilot of 12 years, 80 and 120, with 15% of the units at or below 80% AMI income levels for individuals living in the specific workforce housing unit shall not exceed 100% of AMI. And then Genesee County has seniors at 12 years for 55 plus and market rate.
Oh, no, sorry. Onondaga is also a senior.
Senior,
Yep.
sorry. For a 12-year pilot for 55 plus, and then Genesee has market rate 20 years, cluster of 20 plus units on brownfield or greenfield sites.
Yes.
Probably is the Onondaga for the seniors. It's not income restricted, is that right?
It's not just age. Yes. And I will say the city of Rochester reached out. I believe they reached out to you as well. I had a few conversations with them. They really like the Community Housing Development Fund policy that we have, and they are looking to implement something similar. They said that when they reached out to developers in their area, they went ballistic, for lack of a better term. They couldn't believe that we have that in place and that it's actually working, and they were appalled. And they couldn't believe that developers actually do business here. So they just wanted to find out how it works, and that we are successfully having new developments. And so that is something that they are looking to put into place in the city of Rochester as well. So I just wanted to share that. If you want, I can print out copies of the current policy if anyone needs it.
Sorry, just to be annoyingly clear about the challenges Rochester and my family is facing. So they can't get like financing and government support, like grants and stuff. Are they finding that that's the issue?
They're struggling with, they're looking for a way to promote affordable housing as well, and not have as much market rate. So similarly to what Tompkins County has.
Be curious, I know you don't know this, but be curious what their like 4 or 9% mix is, if any, you know.
It's interesting because I had more like an email back and forth, but I think because they're so interested in your workforce policy, they probably spoke to you versus, which is great. But it's interesting because there's so many affordable housing developers out of Rochester.
Mhm.
So I'm like, I guess if they're only hearing from the market rate, who would be the ones coming to them? I mean, they're hearing from one side,
Right.
But they've got a fairly large affordable development. I mean, because we've been
We're
pulling
taking
them
Rochester
down.
developers, yeah.
Right.
So it is kind of interesting. And I don't know if you have any further conversations that their developers are using our program, you know,
Right.
but they're the affordable developers, to be fair. So, but I don't know. I guess if you only hear from one side of.
Well, and I think you probably heard that feedback from the market rate developers when it first went into play. I mean,
Yeah, but now it's just.
it is what it
Cost
is.
of doing business.
Yeah.
Mhm.
When I remember, we looked at numbers and pro formas and things,
Yeah.
because there are people that really wanted it to be a much higher fee, because
Mhm.
obviously what's being charged does not create you a full unit of affordable housing.
Right.
We get that, when it's a payment in lieu, but doesn't necessarily pay the cost of, like, full cost of offsite development, but. So there was a compromise, I think, from the get-go.
Mhm.
Does anybody need a copy of the current policy? No?
Okay.
Okay. So how do we want to approach the conversation, or what do we hope to see as outcomes? Either a confirmation that our policy is a good policy, or that our policy needs to have some changes to it? What are people leaning towards as sort of an outcome of the conversation?
I think just as a starting point, I think that an incentive program to expand the supply of housing is pretty critical here. Cost of construction, the limited opportunities. So I think there needs to be an inducement available, and it should, focus on the kind of housing we want to have to occur. Having said that, working with for-profit developers to build and maintain and operate affordable housing with income restrictions and rent limits, it's a challenge. It's not their specialty. Working with the Ithacan, it takes a lot of effort to keep that project going in terms of compliance with the agreement, and their outlook to the world is different. And I think that the in lieu payment is not a bad thing, because you provide the funding to an organization that wants to provide affordable housing with income limitations, rather than a developer who's forced to do it. And it just makes it a lot easier to create the units and have them comply over the long term, because we're looking at long periods of time. It was one thing if you said it was, 4 years, enforce it would be one thing, but when you're getting into a 20 or 30-year kind of agreement, or 49.5-year agreement, that's a lot to ask as developers sell the property and different players come in and they don't remember who was there first. So it's just something to keep in mind, that it's not foolproof, and it takes a lot of ongoing effort by both sides, whoever is managing that effort. So I like keeping the retention of the option of the in lieu payment.
And I should say, all of these great brains are involved with the Program Oversight Committee of the Community Housing Development Fund. So we've seen in the last round that the IDA funds were critical, because we had far more requests than we could accommodate with the normal funding of the program.
I think it's great having the option for the developers of either paying into the fund or having the units.
Yes. Yes, yeah, I mean, the answer to that is yes, right? It's work.
Yeah.
Right?
But reinforcing the existing, I guess,
Right.
if other people feel that it should be different, and mandate it be built on site. There's an argument to be made for that, but it's, in the perfect world, that would be ideal, but it's, in practice, it's a much more difficult thing to accomplish.
I guess some of my question is, how do we look outside of the city for greater development and incentivize that activity? And trying to understand, is there any role that could be played in for sale housing or site development for the purpose of building for sale housing? I don't know if you have to break it up or what the case may be. But I guess I would like to see this expanded outside of the city into some key areas, and see if we can bring success to other parts of Tompkins County.
So do you mean the projects that would be applying for the IDA incentives and therefore subject to? That's what you're talking about? Okay.
There aren't any incentives available for sale housing, though, through the
Right.
IDA, right?
Right. And Russ, maybe if you could speak to that from a legal standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, you can incentivize, for sale, standalone or condominium type projects where, individual homeowners or purchasers would come in and buy and own, their own home at the outset. So during the construction period, if you had, Orion Homes, for example, coming in, building, property, or whoever it might be, you could incentivize them at the outset by sales tax and mortgage recording tax. And you could do a pilot until the individual units are sold. It's rare to see those types of projects. Monroe County did one a number of years ago, and I don't, a number, 10, 15 years ago, and I believe that they somehow structured it where the pilot did continue. I'd have to look more closely at that. But yes, you could incentivize the development of, for sale properties at the outset. It just wouldn't be as though Kelly buys a house with her husband and says, "Oh, great, we get a pilot, and our real property taxes are abated." That would be great, but that's not really feasible.
So Russ, you're talking more like a neighborhood scale, like you're building a.
Yeah, I mean, to incentivize individual builders to come in and build a house on either on spec or they have a buyer that they're building for, that would really not be something that would work, I don't think.
But a subdivision,
Subdivision, you could do that again at the outset, for certainly.
Well, and that's reminding me of, I thought there's talk a while back about it. I think it was in Corning, the kind of more the pilot increment financing where
Yeah.
they did the infrastructure and things. And I think how the homes were built as rentals, but they were individually parceled in the pilot. So as each one sold in the future, you could peel it out of the pilot.
Yeah, you could certainly do infrastructure, roads, sewer, water, through a PIF, a pilot increment financing. And the way that works is you would need the consent of the taxing jurisdictions to divert all or a portion of a pilot to finance or cover debt service related to infrastructure or roads or whatever that might be for a project. It's not limited to housing. But you would need the consent of the taxing jurisdictions for them to give up, if you will, a portion of what they would otherwise receive under a pilot. We've done that. I don't know if you're familiar with the Petro truck stop in Seneca County. They did a sewer line that was financed and bankable for what was, like a 5 mile long sewer line. So yes, that is something that can be done.
thoughts?
I guess that's steering us away from that in some ways, from at least the policy as it's currently laid out. I mean, the one thing I will say is the current policy, the funds coming into the community housing development fund program, a lot of our recent costs have been from the program side have been for the for sale affordable housing. And so the only reason we've been able to support those at the level we have is because we had the IDA money bolstering resources. So at least it's not coming into the program from for sale, but some of it is going out of as to the for sale side. So at least there's that happening.
Right.
The trick on PIF pilots in the past has been to get all taxing jurisdictions to
You'll
buy
never
in.
get the school districts.
Right.
Yeah.
That and the school districts will make the claim that they're impacted if it's housing. There'll be more students, and they may be more reluctant to give up what they would otherwise receive. And you don't have to get all of the taxing jurisdictions consent. If the county, town, or city, whatever it is, want to consent and the school doesn't, you could have at least some revenue to help with infrastructure.
I mean, that sounds like that lever's existed before. It just sounds like it's one that's never,
We're not building a lot of subdivisions. So.
I know that's the problem, right? I mean, look at our snapshot or 10 years ago, or whatever it was, 10 years ago. And what did we need? 2,000 new for sale units, and we got what, like 60? Is my numbers off?
Yeah.
It's worse than that, right? I mean, so
We can always bring your day down.
thank you. Yes.
If I could just make one other quick comment, just going
Yeah.
back to, Kelly's, summary of what other policies IDAs may or may not have. I wouldn't get bogged down in what is everyone else doing, because it's across the board. Some have no policy, some have a stricter policy than you. And obviously Ithaca and Tompkins County is unique in its own right. I think it's certainly worthwhile looking at what other, communities are doing. But yeah, everyone has different needs. And in fact, I know that Genesee County and Monroe County are kind of doing the same thing you guys are doing. They're examining their policy and what works and what doesn't work, and how do we incentivize, both market rate and affordable housing, focusing on affordable, which is, what's needed in Tompkins County. So I just put that out there, that don't get bogged down in, what is Genesee County, a totally different community, or what's Steuben County doing. Helpful, but I wouldn't, like I said, worry too much about what everyone else is doing. Just my thought.
Well, that's a good comment. I mean, is the need still strongly there for, because when we talk about affordable, right, we have capital A affordable, clearly defined, and then we have, well, it's just affordable, at whatever income level
Right.
we're at, attainable housing. What do we feel we still need? Because I do believe, similar maybe to Nell's comment, and if I'm paraphrasing this wrong, please correct me, we're going to get what we incentivize a little bit, and we need to continue to incentivize certain things to get certain activities. And so where should we be incentivizing, I think, is sort of the question for this committee.
And I think that's true to a point. You'll get what works with the incentives. There are a lot of places that make incentives that don't work.
Yeah.
Seattle one time did a incentive to get affordable units, you get an extra floor, but you actually needed 3 more floors to pay off the change in building type that comes with that extra floor. So, you can have good intentions with an incentive, but if it doesn't make the numbers work for the project.
It's good to remember.
I've been hearing about the missing middle for well over a decade. I'm curious if anyone has ever made progress in addressing that, because we certainly have not. We have we have a few additional townhomes and semi-affordable single family homes outside of INHS deed restricted ones.
I mean, 10 years ago, when my husband and I bought our house, right, we were looking at 200 and under, and there's a lot of options, as just 2 working people. And now that doesn't exist. Not even outside of the city. So there's been quite a bit of change, and I think if you saw some relief on the, maybe in the 350 to 400, you could see some people move up and move out and open up some of those others, but it's tough, especially in the for sale market.
Right. I foresee a future when we'll say 350 to 400 was an affordable price relative to where we might be 10 years from now.
It's under 500.
So
Doing good. It's hard.
Programs that can develop that price point or might find a way to maintain that price point would be valuable. I don't think that's necessarily the IDA's policies can really be targeted on that too well. Maybe can, but I think it makes sense to look at the IDA policy and think of the 3 different components that it has in terms of the sales tax incentive, the pilot agreement, and the partial recording mortgage tax, and think about, are there places where that makes a bigger difference or not? As we go up this spectrum, I think affordable housing projects need all those things to make them work, when you're going affordable, large A. But as you go up in towards, and I think this is a linguistic thing to some degree, missing middle can mean the physical design of kind of more than a single family home, but less than a 5-story. But also missing middle, sometimes referred to as kind of middle income homeowners too. And that's where we've really seen a change, I think, in the last 15 years, is that used to be a pretty affordable segment, relatively speaking. And now it's much harder to find places that are affordable. And I think the idea is, looking to try to see that connection between the workforce and the economy and those housing units. I think the study could probably help do some analysis in that area. Just look at that linkage. Is it impacting the county's economic competitiveness to have housing prices so high? Or what are the implications of having commuters, versus residents
Right.
measured at different areas?
Well, and I remember years ago having the conversation, I think with Heather about like, when does it make sense for somebody to apply for any of the IDA incentives? And she was like, under 12 units, don't even like think about it because it just, the math doesn't work.
Mhm.
So I guess I'd be curious if that's still the situation, or is it now 18 unit, kind of what that is, because I think
Right.
if you know who realistically can pursue the incentives, so you have a sense of what type of development you can get for the people that are either having to add units. But I mean, honestly, if we had anybody that's not a capital A affordable housing project add the units on site, I think pretty much everybody's opted into the payment.
The applicant did half of their units,
Oh,
anyway, that's all.
yeah. So for the most part, most of the market rate developers would be deciding to pay into the program. So I guess who are you likely to get doing what kind of development? Because again, like the whole idea of if we're incentivizing something that they're never going to come and do, we're not going to win on either side of the equation in that scenario sort of thing. And then, because I think there's the who's building on the front end, getting the IDA incentive, but then what that money, if they're doing a payment, where that's going out, what it's doing on the other end. So you've got that kind of
And
pipeline.
there's a couple of those new state programs that haven't really been tapped yet. The Affordable Home Ownership Opportunities Program for 5 to 50 units for sale that can be priced up to 100% of market rate. Might be interesting to see how could this policy make that program
Accessible.
for more people and to market it and maybe say, you go to this program, there's an easier pathway, or maybe it's a little lower fee structure or something to induce that, because it's really a pretty deep subsidy program from the state with lots of strings, as I understand as well. Typical New York State program, but if we're looking at for sale housing, that's kind of in that 80 to 100%, maybe even up to 120 in some cases. That could be an interesting program to try to take advantage of and see how can the IDA assist in that. Again, it's home ownership, so it really have to be upfront cost, right? That would provide the benefits. So it could be that sales tax, but it might probably not the pilot portion, right?
So this could be a terrible idea, just spitballing here, but because not everybody fully understands that, like the state programs. I'm just wondering if to have like an online webinar or something, like to get the state people in really like helping with nuts and bolts and having some Q&A and things, but also adding okay, if you're doing this, how you compare with our local resources to try to get out to the various developers that may not fully, or they're like, I kind of know like that's there, but it looks like too big a headache to get involved with to see if there's any way to move the needle or honestly get feedback if the program's not working for the state. I think too, if it would be kind of mutually beneficial to hear why developers aren't jumping at it as well. It's sad to have resources sitting there if they're not going to get deployed. So I don't know.
This goes back, I think, probably to David's comment of, right, it's got to work for the.
Mhm. And I mean, we've had this with, I think, NYSERDA before too, where it's like, that's nice, it doesn't work.
Right.
So we have to explain to you why it doesn't work, so that you can change it and hopefully make it work kind of.
So what do you think on waiting on making any changes on this until we have any work done on the study?
I think you would really want to understand how this impacts the pro forma, of a project that could work. The specifics and the policy, as far as how we use the money, are very flexible, I think. So that would be something to look at. If it's providing the flexibility you want, if it's directing towards the projects that you want, or it may just be a back and forth between Community Housing Development Fund and the IDA as those things go forward. But I think it's important to have, they say the math is relentless, to have the math show that we know a bunch of projects that we want to see that will work. with the incentives that we can provide. The policy does specifically list where you can fund projects, which isn't just greenfield all over the county.
What does it say specifically again?
The downtown density district, Lansing Town Center, and brownfields that are DEC inactive hazardous waste sites.
Which I think that would include Southwoods.
Yeah.
And I
Is there a
know,
way to broaden that? Is there a need to broaden that?
I think that's probably what you're getting at. Like, if we're seeing out of the study, like where would be helpful to broaden without like creating a negative sprawl impact, or, something that like it is an unintentional consequence.
And these are the projects that you're drawing funds from because you're incentivizing them through pilots and other IDA things. And then the money that the CHDF gets can deploy it anywhere.
I mean, the one thing I will say, if there's a little time delay before really substantially changing the policy in some way, is that we're fortunate that right now it looks like we still have a pipeline of capital A affordable projects that we're still hoping to see, coming to us for the housing fund. So like, I think we've got the back end, the takers of the money to develop the affordable housing for now. And like by 2026, that may start to change depending on what the situation is with programs. So.
Geographic targeting is an interesting question though, because the county has established, I forget the term.
The development focus areas.
Development focus areas, with
DFAs.
Oh, you're good.
which are not necessarily eligible. So, if you hear about things going on in Dryden doesn't have this policy in place. I think in the past, the host jurisdiction has affirmatively said they want to be part of the program, right? But they could be invited to consider or something. They might need like a little trigger, like,
Yeah.
if you really want to see housing, maybe you should be joining with the city's downtown area and brownfield sites and Lansing. I don't think Lansing's had a project come forward toward that. Maybe they have.
Just the affordable
Yeah,
project.
just the affordable in there. Yeah, Milton House.
Yes.
But that would be something to consider, is just to invite others to consider taking advantage of the program or joining into the program, I guess, basically. I don't think that past practice has been to ask those communities to go in.
But we don't,
Technically,
you don't have to.
The IDA doesn't have
Right, you
to,
don't have to, but it's good neighbors.
well, you're impacting some of their flow of income and revenues and maybe enhancing it in the long term, but that's impacting.
But even just the conversations with municipalities between the housing study, housing strategy, we're trying to, bolster our relationships with the municipalities. We know eventually we're leaning towards a new comprehensive plan for the county, which also involves that engagement. But I think some of you may remember Elliot Bedman, like a few years ago, we'd had like kind of offered to go out to any municipality and just have a sit down on their housing challenges and concerns, and did some GIS analysis and things for them. And it was by no means universal take up. I think things have changed where more of our municipalities know they've got a housing problem than in the past. I think it was kind of like that's like development is a city thing, or, those sorts of things, where I think more of our municipalities are now seeing that their own, residents are having affordability challenges.
I mean, I think Dryden would be receptive. I mean, with the work
They
that
were the first time.
they're doing. And I guess one of the other things is around manufactured home communities and the development. The manufactured home of 20 years ago is not the manufactured home of today. And I know there's a small group doing a lot of work in that area. But again, I think we have levers to pull to support progress. And I just don't know if we have enough levers deployed in this toolkit personally. I think it's very focused intentionally so, but I think it's then limiting to the rest of the area that people are struggling to get, it's not just the city of Ithaca where people can get a project off of the ground. And that's, as a rural representative, I think we need to see some more focus in, because there are places like Varna where, it makes sense, where the community housing developments supported that, and private development has made an investment there, and Lansing and parts of Trumansburg, et cetera. I wish we could play more of a greater role in accelerating some of that project growth. But I don't know how to do that. So that's why I'm looking. You, Dougson, if you have any ideas, jump on in.
I mean, if we're really, it's very much outside of this policy. This policy is very specific to extracting something from pilots and reinvesting it in affordable housing. But, IDAs can be involved, especially an IDA with a local development corporation, could buy land, prep it for development, could make money selling off parcels later.
And Rich is very much interested in,
Land banking.
yes.
And I bring up our existing manufactured home parks. It's a tough egg, because I think our health department and the DEC are in a game of chicken right now, because, even properties that have sold with full disclosure and letters from the state, you've got failing systems. So factor that in if you're buying this parcel, and be aware. And then your new buyer comes in and they're like, that's fine, we're not doing anything. And your choice is, they're basically daring the DEC to shut these parks down and make hundreds of people homeless, which they know the state doesn't want to do. So we're in that kind of push-pull, and I know that there's a lot of hope residing on INHS and their Compass project, the idea that there'd be a mission-driven entity starting to buy up some of the parks and competing with just kind of the capital groups and things. But realistically, they're still working on a very new thing. So that's not going to scale to buying the other 47 parks or anything anytime
Gosh.
soon. So that's a complex thing. But it's also, I think, a concern we have both here and throughout the region. I mean, if you think about how bad the water and septic situations are with a lot of the parks here, and then you expand that throughout this part of New York. But that's something that's pretty complex that I'm trying to make this do all the things. Now, if there are conversations down the road, is there a way that the IDA could be helping in certain situations to incentivize the right buyers or current owners?
Or new parks.
That sort of, yeah. So that kind of thing, because the other thing, being the last county in the Appalachian Regional Commission, in theory, should give us some access, hopefully down the road, for some infrastructure funding. I think the days of the big infrastructure funding are a little bit over, but for finite situations where a small expansion that makes sense with a development pattern and but it'd be good to be basing things off of real numbers.
Yes.
Information, I think. So, yeah.
Could the Community Housing Development Fund be a conduit to support existing parks?
I think the affordability part is the challenge. So we do have an award in for Compass because they're committed. And it was a little tricky, to be honest, because obviously you've got a lot rent. And so INHS could kind of make some guarantees about keeping the escalation of the lot leases at an affordable level. I think the issue comes from how do you maintain that with a private owner, especially when some of these parks are starting to sell from the kind of long-time owners into situations where there may be more turnover. Yeah. Because we don't want to get somebody in a situation where we help them get the unit, but they're never going to be able to afford the lot. And we realistically know people aren't picking up manufactured homes and moving. So they're really tied to whatever their lot rent is going to be going down the road.
So So we'll change topics. Because we didn't have an answer on that one, so let's move on. So the city had talked about the seat tap. There was some proposal at council that maybe fizzled a little bit. I'm not sure.
Has been movement since.
Okay. But we're just sort of, do you think that there's going to be any conversation at any point, or is it going to be the new council that comes in that maybe picks
It's a
this
perennial
up?
topic, and yeah, half of council is being replaced next year, so it could come up.
Okay. So for right now, we just go with the impression that it is what it is until it isn't.
I think so. I mean, you could also like,
That feels like a very 2025 statement.
it's true, but you could also just prepare for like that, the borders changing. I think there is some interest in either expanding or changing the boundaries. I doubt there's a lot of sentiment to get rid of it entirely, but
Okay.
Right, the mayors have created I don't forget what the committee structure is, a policy strategy committees or something.
yes.
And it has a affordable housing focus and economic development as well at the same time. So I mean, there will be some working groups looking at the general issue under the mayor's policy structure that was just created. So that would be a conduit for discussing the issue. So I think we won't see anything happen, I don't think, before the end of the year.
No, it's budget season.
Can you be on that committee, Doug?
I am.
Okay, good.
Right now.
Oh, they're doing that? It's kind of, yeah.
Well, thanks for prioritizing. So we'll definitely won't see anything till the end of the year.
Yeah, it's gonna came first, but henceforth, this Monday slot will be occupied.
Got it. Okay.
I know one thing that was brought up multiple times with the policy was, do we want to keep incentivizing market rate housing because of things that, well, it kind of doesn't play into that, but the situation with Steri and putting into place programs that make sure that situations that occur that we've seen.
You're doing a great job. I'm loving this right now, but you're dancing, so keep going.
We want to make sure that there are the proper protocols in place for property management for properties that that the IDA incentivizes. And I know that there is only so much that the IDA can do, but I think it does warrant a discussion of this committee to see what can be done, if there is any further discussion that should be had about making sure that when applications do come to the IDA for different housing types, that there are certain protocols in place for property management and security.
And I think the biggest thing, looking back retrospectively at some of the projects that have recently come forward with challenges, is on-site property management, tenant screening and application process, permanent supports within the property management structure for different constituent groups that may be occupying the space.
Yes.
And then security as just sort of a general conversation, building access, et cetera. Those seemed to be the main highlights. And I guess I would maybe look to Russ a little bit
Yes.
on what levers we can have within our toolkit to, again, we don't want to be property micromanagers through a
Right.
policy, and we don't want to have to track and account for something additional but how do we create a level of accountability around some of the issues that we've seen to try to mitigate those?
Yeah, and it's a good point. And actually, with the issues that recently, came to light, I was thinking about, I knew this was going to come up, and understandably so, that how we could contractually bind a developer to provide the security that's necessary and deal with the issues that come to be with any type of multifamily housing project. And that's something we could certainly work within the IDA contracts that we enter into with the developers. Now, how you gauge what that level that is, and you then do you count the number of police visits, for lack of a better way of putting it? It's something we could certainly implement within the documents, where if they don't comply with the policy or whatever the requirements are, it creates an event of default. The bigger question, as you raised, is, how do you administer that? How do you monitor that? And do you have the staffing and expertise to do that? And that's all the things, the board and the municipalities would need to think about. But that's certainly something we could do. And it may just be something to the effect that, you require the developers to use, again, for lack of a better way of putting it, best efforts to provide a safe community. And if it's determined at the discretion of the IDA upon notice that this is not happening, that they have the right to terminate. So it's something that we'd have to noodle with and nuance, but it's certainly something that we can, and in my opinion, should implement, especially with what's recently happened.
Now, Russ, if you were to put your other hat on as a developer or property manager's attorney, would you ever accept that clause?
Yeah. If I was a real estate developer or representing I'd probably give some pushback as their counsel. But you got to balance the benefits that the IDA is providing with the potential cost of providing a safe community. They should be doing that anyway. Again, things are going to happen from time to time. We all know that. But I think if I was representing a developer, I would probably try to negotiate it if it was overbearing. But it's certainly something that I would ultimately recommend to my client. Hey, look, you can take the benefits with this policy or not. And, it becomes a simple cost benefit analysis.
So how do we create balance off the bat where either those, I mean, because part of the challenge, just personally that I see is how define safe, right? Define certain things, right? And not define terms. It leaves a lot up to the 7 or 9 members of the IDA to become property managers and create an event of default. How do we, one, give guidance to the IDA to know what safe is or is not, and then also to the developer, property manager, so that they can actually do what we're expecting them to do?
Yeah, I think, maybe this could be part of the study that's ongoing or going to be going about, okay, what are the rates of police intervention or calls that are made, and what is the state average, putting down state aside, something like that. And I think it maybe the starting point would be, look, we're going to require that you have a safety protocol policy or whatever that might be as a developer that we need to see and review and make sure that there are, safety mechanisms in place to avoid those types of situations. So I don't know how you would, quantify that, to advise the board, this is what we should be doing. But again, I think it could be part of the study to see, okay, what is happening across the state in similarly sized communities. Again, putting aside, New York City area, as a starting point. And then I would, again, I would have a requirement for either affordable or market rate or any of the housing projects that there are safety procedures in place that the developer has to show. And it may vary from project to project. And, ultimately it's going to be at the board's discretion you know, what is appropriate and what is not, or what is excessive.
Russ, can I ask you, because there's a lot of difference between like a fully affordable project that has units for previously unhoused people versus a developer that decides to include 10 units for 80% of AMI, like there's a real wide kind of range of what kind of may be needed in terms of like both tenant services as well as security and everything in different projects. So I'm wondering if instead of trying to proscriptively say at the outset and cover every flavor project you might ever see, if you could set up like a triggering event, which then and then if triggered by that event, I don't know if it's a complaint by a municipality, code enforcement, law enforcement, something, like what's the triggering event that makes the IDA review, and set up criteria that the IDA reviews, which could include, how many, law enforcement visits and how many,
Right.
or, to have like at least criteria if you can't like kind of define everything so that if the IDA board at that time is reviewing, they're not saying, they're not kind of being arbitrary about, well, I never liked this orange building to begin with, but it's actually like, okay, what's actually happening in terms of, is there a health and safety problem? Are there, defects in the building? Are there, an excess of law enforcement visits comparable to anybody else? Like what's happening that's actually about that safety component, not just, I never liked this project to begin with. So you kind of constrain any potential.
Well, and that's kind of my concern is that without, we get into what I'll call the planning board effect, right? Where it's like, well, let me just add things that I think we
Yeah.
need to add because I think we need to add them because it's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Rather than like, this is the guidance that we've been given.
Yeah, and there's really no limitation, as to what the legal limitation as to what the IDA can or cannot impose upon any project as far as this type of situation. But I agree, you don't want to give any board, the discretion. I didn't like this project at the outset anyway, so I'm going to default them because they've had 10 police calls a month or whatever it is. So, there's a lot of flexibility as to what the criteria would be for the IDA to have the opportunity to review and potentially trigger a default. And I know that it may vary from project to project, depending upon the scope of the project, where it's located, all the various factors that go into any project. It'll take some work. It's not as though it's something that we can kind of create from whole cloth overnight for the board to consider. But I do think it should be thought about, and then we can try to come up with a template policy, if you will, based upon what the study shows and what the appetite of the board might be. And I'm not trying to punt and just say you can do whatever you want legally. I get it that there's got to be some strategy and thought given into it, any sort of policy, especially one like this. And remember, in any IDA project, there's very broad language in all of our contracts that they require with all applicable law. So if they're in violation of some sort of city code as far as health and safety goes, and they violate that and don't remedy it, that could trigger an event of default. So we do have a kind of a 10,000-foot level mechanism by which we can potentially put pressure on a developer if there are problems. But as far as fine tuning it, that's just going to take a little bit of time and like I said, noodling with what the flavor of the board might be.
Russ, could we start with a specific type of housing development and formulate a policy for either capital A affordable or for projects that have E-Shot units or X type of units in it with, again, without sort of like singling it out, but like, could we take small bites at the apple?
Sure.
And develop incrementally?
Yeah, I think that would be my recommended approach because, you're never going to come up with a perfect policy, especially when it comes to things like this. You do it, is this working? Is it not working? And you start with either one type of project or types of projects that you see are having the most types of issue or most significant issues with health and safety or whatever it might be, and then kind of create it and develop it as you go. And the sky's the limit. The board can do whatever it wants and impose whatever it wants on any project with the understanding that you're not administratively set up to monitor every single project and every single police call, or every single ambulance visit. Something like that would be just impossible, and I don't know what it would achieve, frankly.
That's a lot of this power is actually not in defaulting on the project, but in threatening that and getting movement from the developer. It sounds like you're saying there's already some power that the IDA could use to pressure, based on not following,
Yes,
health code, building code, or other.
absolutely. In other words, if Kelly and the board were advised by, city code officers or the city code department, whatever it might be called, that project X is not compliant with these safety requirements by, city statute or state law, whatever it might be, we would then have the ability to put pressure and say, look, you're technically in violation of the law. You've agreed contractually to comply with all applicable law and either remedy it or we're going to consider all of our options.
Else?
I apologize. I've got to jump. I have a conflict at 11:15 that I'm frankly ill prepared for. So Kelly, continue on, and then we have a couple calls this afternoon, and maybe
Yep.
we could debrief either before or after one of those.
Okay.
And if there's any other follow-up questions or concerns, Kelly can certainly provide you my email and cell number. Feel free to call me, and I'm happy to help in any way I can. This is great. I really think this is, you're hitting the key points. It's just going to take some time. As I mentioned, a number of our other IDA clients are going through the same thing. And housing is a hot button right now across the state, across country. So this is nothing unique to Tompkins County, in my experience anyway.
Thanks, Russ.
Hey, Nels, good to see you, and I'll see some of you at least virtually on Wednesday. And again, get my contact information from Kelly to the extent anyone wants to reach out to me by phone or email or text. I'm pretty responsive.
Thanks, Russ.
Thanks, Russ.
Okay, take care, everybody. Sorry I had to jump.
Oh, no worries. Good luck.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Take care, everybody.
No.
I think that the IDA is in the best position when they're developing the inducement agreement and when, going into the kind of pilot execution date or whatever.
Yes.
Then later on, it's really challenging to monitor after the fact when your tools are kind of
Right.
not always up to the task or not the right fit. So I'm not a big fan of having the IDA review property management, policies. I think it'd be easier if you set up some standards at the front saying you got to have a lockable door. Some very low level secure things that we've seen have been missing in some projects.
Unless you're building access policy or.
Right.
For affordable projects, the state will not fund security, on-site security. So that has to come out of the developer fee or so there's some limits of going to the state and saying we should have paid security. They won't fund that. So, you have to be cognizant of some of the limitations. You don't want to create a requirement and then say, well, I can't meet that requirement. It makes my project, not competitive for the state funding. So you got to be a little bit sensitive there. But the one thing that really stands out about Asteria as an example is they pitched it as a project that was going to have 40 ESHI units, very low income, and then almost all the other units were going to be 40 to 60% AMI. That's not the way it turned out in practice. They didn't meet their original income bands, which is what they used to underwrite the project and what they brought to the IDA. So requiring them to meet their income bands as they presented it would be one way to protect that it is truly a diverse income levels within the project. Within affordability, there's diversity of income.
And they end up clustering all at one income level or?
Yeah, they're all very low income,
Okay.
vast majority.
Part of that has to be with their tenant screening
Screening.
Well,
process.
right, intake and screening, right, yeah. Right, but I don't want to know, I don't know what I would say exactly how to do the screening, because that's really beyond the IDA to
100%.
overlook that, but I think they could have come back and said to the IDA, we couldn't fill up all these units because, the way we had marketed it, and then they could, there could be a discussion, okay, if you want to change it, then we need, more support, or more support assistance or something. We even ran that through with Rick Manzardo of Vecino. He said, that's a fair thing to say, we pitched it as a project that was going to have these income bands, and you got to have a little flexibility within that, but they really deviated far away from the original vision of like 140 units were going to be, working poor, well, not working poor, but people who are working and earning a reasonable income, and getting help with their funding, versus the 40 Eastside units, which were people who are formerly homeless, where there's a very deep subsidy. So I think.
And a high degree of support.
And there were supports for those people, but then they brought in a lot of people who have high needs that didn't have supportive services.
That's what
And
issue is.
that created a challenge, yeah. And so if they didn't have that as their original plan for the different, the income spectrums in the unit. So I think that's a fair thing to ask the IDA to say, you told us it was going to be this type of categories of income, but that's not what you ended up with. And that would be, there needs to be enough flexibility, because they have to get something like 90% occupancy before they can access the final state funding. So I mean, there's some pressure there to fill up the units, but it shouldn't be so high that they just open the doors and say like, everybody's eligible.
Yeah. And that protects the IDA too, because like, even if you get a developer who's deciding to do mixed income and include the affordable units on site, everybody always wants 80% AMI. At 80% AMI, there are more choices for that population. So everybody's competing for a smaller pool of people at that income level. So it's foreseeable that somebody could, back to the wall, all of a sudden end up dropping, and the actual tenants to lease up are much lower income and need better support. So if there's a triggering event, that if you're really off of what you had proposed initially, that you get to revisit, are there adequate supports for the actual?
But are we, at the IDA level, we're not defining what the mix is between.
The developers coming to you and telling you.
They're telling you.
But they're saying it's between 40 or between 20 and 60, or.
Their application will have income bands of number of households at various income bands, below 30, 40 to 50, 50 to 60 are the typical ones.
And
they
the
can go up
number
to
of
80
units that they would have.
Mhm.
Okay.
They usually view it as under 80, under 60,
Right.
under 40.
So
That's not
everybody can be
usually a problem.
But they have projected revenue coming in
Yeah.
from those numbers, yeah, you're right, though. The one exception is that if you have a housing choice voucher, they cannot deny somebody who's a choice storage shareholder from coming to their unit. They have to pay what the rent, would be, but that would be the one, we don't have, turns out Casino is, a scary project has like 4 housing choice voucher holders in the whole project.
And the housing choice voucher is.
Section 8,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that kind of puts the IDA in the position of paying attention to the thing the state is not paying as much attention to as well. Cause I don't know that you all want to spend a ton of time trying to second guess the requirements that the state already has in some of their programs and add extra from the IDA's end. But if the support side seems to be kind of a little bit of a black hole, that's one. And it's one where, I don't know, because I think, there's been a lot of talk about security and that side of thing, but I think the support and the security go hand in hand. And so it seems like that's the legitimate part where you're not really getting maybe an adequate attention or funds from the state side. So that's something that triggers a look at it if things get really out of kilter.
So if we broke it down into a couple of buckets or whatever, and it's sort of building access, security, life safety, strategy plan, investment, et cetera, then it's tenant mix and tenant screening and tenant intake and support, and what is their plan to provide support, and if their mix is to deviate, what investment or what resources are available to help bring in the support. I mean, so that is it that we want to be probing and asking those questions in advance to say, okay, yeah, you're targeting for 60% or 80%, but if you all drop down to like 40 or 30 or 20 or at the lower end, those residents are going to need a higher degree of support. Do you have any consideration given to if that's the case? And is the goal to have an enlightened, informed developer that will give you a strong response that then you can hold them to? Or what are we trying to achieve at the initial level where not all plans are created?
I think you're trying to hold them to the mix that they're marketing the project to the state for funding. And then if you think that number has too many people with high needs, then probably the question, how are you going to provide the supportive services? But for the most part, the developers don't want to put a burden on themselves for extra supportive services unless they have funding from the state. So they would probably try to avoid that upfront.
So I guess though, that way at the contract stage, at the initial stage, you're putting the developer on notice that you're paying attention to what this mix is. So they don't just, assume that they can fiddle as
So
they
that's
desire
100.
without there being a similar consequence of, if this needs to change, you need to tell us, and we're going to be expecting supports to increase to match that. And so they're going in, I guess, eyes wide open in that scenario.
That's kind of, yeah, I mean, I think some of the life safety, security, access questions, we're gonna have key fobs, or we're gonna have door codes, or we're gonna have somebody man the front door of this building, or we're gonna have X, Y, and Z. Like those are things I think that you can, without a building design, you can generally make a statement on relatively easily. So the expectation that a developer could provide us with a safety and security plan that was robust and address some of our concerns is there. I think some of the support, like what we're talking about here, is a little bit more, hey, if things deviate from what you're saying, you're gonna also have to adjust. And our expectation is that you're gonna support.
Yeah, right. I mean, or that you said you were doing a mixed income project and it's not a mixed income project anymore,
Incentives.
that's a problem for the initial project. And then maybe that is a clawback scenario.
Mhm.
Or a threat of a clawback scenario,
Right.
because we get into a situation where once people are housed, you don't want to
Unhealthy.
unhouse them, right?
Yeah.
So
Do we have a sense of why, did their market analysis wasn't great, or did anything drastically change, or was it just we wanted to lease up faster, or kind of what
from
drove?
what we know in that case, it seems like there was an urgency to lease up.
Well, and then that gives them information, because it's like, okay, if you think you're covering your costs by leasing faster versus leasing slower because you're going to avoid needing to up your supportive side expenses.
Well, I think there's also maybe a philosophy misunderstanding of housing first and what comes with that. It's not just house individuals, it's supportive housing for individuals.
Well, that they succeed in the housing.
Yes, it's not just
Here are the keys.
here's
but
the
it's
keys, but here's the keys
you're
with the
gonna make
support to be successful in this housing.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's.
Because also then when people are sanctioned, when things happen, you could be cutting them off from future housing if things go really badly.
It did sound like from their meeting too, that they regretted their initial admittance policy, that now they're going through very painful, slow and expensive eviction processes.
Right.
Well, I think part of it is there's different incentives for different players. So when you aren't a mission-driven nonprofit and you outsource property management and leasing to a company whose job is to lease it up as quickly as possible, and there's a person who's doing that and his only or her only metric is how fast did you lease it up?
Yeah.
You're gonna get the outcome that your system is designed for.
This, again, it comes, I mean, you get what you incentivize,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You have a property manager who's incentivized to fill up quickly, they're gonna fill up quickly, rather than fill up appropriately.
Mhm.
And so, Kelly, I don't know how we draft something or put something in place that puts these mixed income projects kind of on notice, but or it sort of outlines what are the IDA's I mean, I wonder if it's more of like, let's lay out our priorities and here's what's important to us, here's what we're gonna be paying attention to. And finding some way to, you can address that up front or,
Realistically, the only developers who are coming to the IDA are for-profit developers, because not-for-profits can go through the municipalities now and avoid the IDA involvement. Now,
Right.
the IDA may be a better able to look at this issue countywide. I'm not saying that's not the best way to go. But if they, for example, the downtown West State Street project with INHS, they looked at, we tried to steer them to go to the IDA, but they said the fee structure is higher at the IDA than going through a municipality, just like the Varna project. So they can go through those local approvals basically at zero costs, where even with the reduced fee, it's going to be $100,000 to go through the IDA, which is kind of offsetting the Community Housing Development Fund contribution to these projects. So it's more than likely it's going to be for-profit developers who are coming through the IDA, and not-for-profits are going to go a different route unless there's some sort of, revised fee structure that makes it really a close fit. Because I think municipalities are not really well equipped to manage.
And you may
pilot
remember,
agreements.
so I think it was a few years ago now, we looked at, because the county was getting direct requests
Yeah.
for pilots and sitting down with our assessment director, because, we didn't have the legal expertise and everything. And so at that time, talking with IAD about like, okay, you're paying for this expertise and you have this expertise, for us to duplicate it at the county level made zero sense. And so we basically made it kind of our policy that if the county receives a pilot request for housing, we refer them to the IDA. But because INHS and others, realistically don't want to pay that fee. So I think that's what you're saying about, like, they're going to the municipalities, which realistically, if the municipalities looked at this, they would also realize that they're not in a great position. Because we were just having trouble too, like making sure that payments were getting made and, like sending out all the documentation and everything. It was creating a mess. And so both for the taxpayers' benefit as well as for the developers, trying to.
so should we be looking at that fee?
It'd be a way to induce people to go to the IDA and have everybody go to the IDA rather than having this kind of bifurcation.
And by everybody, we're not having a million like affordable developments. So it's not like it's one maybe. Yeah.
And realistically, it doesn't cost us that to. There's a cost to it to administer these projects, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Well, and the cost is also to the IDA existing, right? The
Yeah.
projects
Right.
for the existence of the IDA.
Yeah.
Um,
So maybe that fee is something that we should be looking at.
What is financially feasible for a mission-driven, not-for-profit.
Yeah, and what makes sense for the
And so,
IDA.
with this project, the Varnish project, for example, they're gonna have to collect the pilot from the developer and then allocate it out on an annual basis to each of the taxing jurisdictions.
That's not happening.
I'll bet you the county Dryden hasn't done that right?
Yeah.
And they've got to do that for 30 years.
So then you end up in a situation where honestly, like, the taxing jurisdictions aren't collecting what they ought to have in some cases.
To catch up when they figure it out and.
It's just, it's a mess. So I think like say if there was no fee for a capital A project, then, and we got the word out to the municipalities. So it's like, now you're not spending your staff time, your town board time, or your town attorney time, to send everybody the same place, and that we can have clean records. And when all of the taxing information goes out.
I think if the fee had gotten down to something like 40,000, then I could have said.
When the projects are going up, so it's percentage based.
It's a percentage, but and the construction costs are going up so high that 1% or 0.5% is a lot.
Yeah.
There already is a discounted fee for affordable units on the IDA policy, but it's still, what is it? Is it 0.5% instead of 2% or?
1% instead of 1%.
Instead of 1%, but a current project's going to be $20 to $30 million. So, 0.5% is still a pretty big number on that. But if it could get closer to what your actual costs are, legal fees and administration, I would support pushing them all to one spot
Yeah.
to administer, because there's gonna be errors made when the community has one, every 7 years or 10 years
Yeah.
that they're administering.
And this was a recent change?
There was various views on who could grant the abatements and who couldn't. And so at one time there was thought that only the county or the IDA could do it. And then there was a review of that, and that any municipality, the host municipality, could be the town, village, or city,
Mhm.
or the county would be
Mhm.
considered a host municipality for granting those for not-for-profits. So there's been an evolution.
So I guess as if anybody's contacted the county, they usually contact Jay, and so Jay would be referring to the IDA. But those in the know that the municipalities are willing to play ball, if they talk to the municipality, we'll see that they can avoid the fee.
Right, and they say they can put that on the project, that's the argument.
Maybe that's a topic for our next meeting.
It could be some revenue versus zero revenue coming to the IDA, I guess, would be one thing looking at it too, because they're just avoiding the IDA if they can go somewhere else.
It's a challenge for a small municipality to understand the tail of costs that's gonna come with that too.
Right,
Right, I mean, there's a reason that it costs $150,000 at the IDA, because they can be paying for a lawyer 25 years later to try and threaten default or to pursue default or something like that. It's a really hard thing when a developer comes and, I saw this with solar, working with the town, like they can come and offer you community benefits and they will give you a better deal than you get through the IDA. You just charge us less, or, but then you have your town, it's the town clerk who collects taxes. So you're gonna have the town clerk in the middle of, like, town clerks are like sorting envelopes on the floor around tax time. It's a big peak of work that you're then committing to.
But I don't know, like the legal ramifications too, like, if the entity, the municipality collecting the pilot, if things go wrong, if they're like on the hook to the other taxing entities because they're supposed to be collecting this. So if they're in trouble, like, are they putting themselves into a financial legal liability, which is maybe the stick that goes along with the carrot of the IDA can reduce this headache. But also you do not want to like financially be on the hook for reimbursing.
Can you ask Russ if that's the case?
Yeah.
Well, because it's like if you don't pay your school taxes, the county makes you whole, and then we're the ones that are collecting for.
But all of a sudden, if a town is like, I've got to pay off the school district and the county now, like, they're like.
Bankrupt the town.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't, then even if your town attorney hasn't already told you, like, this is maybe not the best idea, like you know that you're vulnerable to major problems.
And I have seen that happen. Direct experience with that, with a city paying out, over $500,000 in taxes to school districts that they hadn't received.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure the school districts are paying attention these days.
Mhm.
So we've got a lot of work in this committee. Dodson, are you ready since you were late? And we assigned Jerry a few things too.
The list of the things you mentioned, like the priorities that we want to address, and then later we can go through and say, like, Russ or say it's infeasible or it's not advisable because it'll take too much work, et cetera, something like that.
Yes. Yes. Let me see if I can try to do it off my memory, and then you can apologize. My technology died and came penless. But I saw all these notes over here. So I'm in good hands, and it's being recorded, so I can just go back. So in terms of policy review, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
So we have our policy review, I think, trying to understand where we can provide incentives. Right, is sort of are there other places that maybe aren't included that we should be looking at? Should we be having conversations with other municipalities to see if this is something that they want to take advantage of these tools and try to incentivize certain things. Is that a fair statement?
Yep.
Is our current menu of offerings sufficient to meet the market needs? I think is another big question. And should we be adjusting up or down or providing something new to our sort of menu of offerings in terms of how we can incentivize projects?
That was gonna be informed by the housing demand study?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I think the question around infrastructure, but personally, this is a priority for me. But if it's not for the group, then that's fine. Infrastructure and for sale housing development and how either the IDA and a development corporation, what are the levers that are there that we can pull, and trying to understand what Russ mentioned about sort of getting the approval, and what was the name of the
PIF pilot?
PIF pilot?
Yeah.
And maybe getting some more education around those mechanisms. And then seeing,
And I would just say with the PIF, I think one of the things would be, is the IDA prepared to issue those and administer those pilots? Because if you're not, don't waste your time,
Yeah.
because I don't think there's anybody else like that. I think if you're gonna try to do it at like town and municipal levels, that's gonna not succeed particularly well. So I think it's whether you want to do this.
we would have to be the administrator, yeah. So I guess understanding that whole process. Are there other things around policy review that we've left out? And let me take one step back. Maybe looking at, let's just say affordable projects maybe first, and how we look at safety, security, and building access. And then also how we look at unit mix, income level unit mix, and what mechanisms for accountability and awareness for new projects to say these are priorities for us, and you need to it needs to be back and forth.
Yeah, I don't want to disincentivize, lowering projects, just that they should stick to what they present, if they say it's going to be a mix of this mix, they should have to come back and explain why they didn't achieve that within reason. I don't think you want to be like targeting, like you must have 42 units that are in this
That's
category.
that's something you could do sooner than things that are waiting on the study. If you want to already, go ahead, because it seems like that's more procedure than policy, because your policy is just the big picture. But, you've got what's the contract language and things. So if you wanted to go ahead and build in, if you're going to vary from what you told us your income bands are, here's what happens. You could be building that in while you're waiting maybe for some other information to do other policy changes.
Okay, so what their own, what they presented is their definition of their project, basically.
And there probably is language in there already that's very broad that says you will build, the application says you were gonna build, and along with the cudgel of are you following the building code, and do you have safety?
I guess the issue is what triggers, or do you need some kind of stronger language, because you're talking about the monitoring, the IDA doesn't want to be having to go in and
It's a snapshot.
who actually went into these units, but maybe is it they have
It's an
to
issue.
report on Lisa or something like the initial Lisa. What is your actual mix after Lisa?
Well, they do an annual report to us, obviously, right?
On jobs and,
Yeah, I mean, it could be a part of the annual report, could be.
Something where you put that burden on them versus you having to remember to go prior. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a project recently that wasn't a student focused, but if you went to their website, it was all student focused. So those are just do what you say you're gonna do.
Yeah.
And get better marketing. So. Did we miss anything on policy?
Fee.
A fee structure for
Affordable housing.
affordable housing that could otherwise go through a municipal conduit?
we mentioned it today, but we last, excuse me, updated the per unit payment in lieu of regard to affordable housing 2 years ago. I don't know if it warrants revisiting.
The CPI,
Yeah.
review or something.
Yeah, that's something we can. So the task would be to review the payment and for the affordable unit, what the appropriate number should be based on market conditions, inflationary, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, it sucks for both sides. I'm sure the developer has higher costs, but that incentive now has less value to the, whoever it's passed on to via the CHDF, so.
For next meeting.
Yeah, I feel like this is gonna be a work plan
Mhm.
for the next 18 months,
Yeah,
right? I mean, but if we time this with the housing study, I think a lot of these things will be sort of informed and ebb and flow in. So maybe we can, Kelly, work on kind of consolidating these into a list with maybe like a couple sentence narrative on each one, and then we can, as we're prepared, pull them down and talk about them and try to solidify some thoughts.
Mentioned too that the county's applying for a CDBG grant to help fund the housing study. Do you know the timeline for that?
We spoke about it earlier, but I think we'll know by the end of the year with the RFP going out in January or February. And the grant is a 13-month from award letter to close out.
And I would have a strong sense of my colleagues that if for some reason maybe that didn't come to fruition, the county is supportive of the activity. At this point, just trying to minimize the budgetary constraints that we're putting ourselves in. But if we needed to go back to the well 2026, the water's not dry, it's just lower down in the well.
And then for your work too, I think as work is going throughout the year, there may be the full study's not done, but you've got key information that helps you. So if you're trying to move pieces along the way, you don't have to just wait till the end of the year.
right.
Something we didn't talk about, but that is tied into this is the UTEP. And if you need to look at it as your goals change. Because, must abide by the UTEP actually, absolutely, but it's also something that you can change.
So is that something we should have a review of?
Uniform tax exemption policy, is that what it stands for?
Yes, yeah. Gold star.
I just went with that policy that we have to conform to. I'm glad to know what it stands for now.
You also mentioned maybe researching or asking Russ, what tools are available for assisting, missing middle and or affordable for sale housing. Be another task, that's at the top, but I think it's to know what that question comes up a lot. What can be done to assist?
How to address
Is
the
this all in his book? Not his book, his firm's book.
Is it just on the website or is
It's on the website
Yeah.
too. Mhm.
What's the book?
It's-
Economic development, basic economic development, or
It is like
the handbook of economic development.
So
The Bible.
his Stern Harris speech, puts out this book that they update every once in a while, that's specific to New York State and what IDAs and LDCs.
Mhm.
For, it's economic development, so a lot of it is employment type, but there's a small section on housing.
Can we get a copy of it?
Interesting.
It is online as
Yeah,
well.
it is.
but,
Mhm.
Part of IDA training.
Yeah.
Usually happy with
Yes.
full copies.
Yep.
Have fast copies of it. That'd be great.
Yeah, stuffers.
I know.
And you get a book, and you get a book. Wow, talk about a passive aggressive way to hope this helps.
I know.
Good luck in your new role.
It's more like, here's all the things you could pay us to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's their menu of offerings. Okay, so we've got that. Anything else that we're missing? Besides funding to solve all these problems.
Are this was a community housing development fund question. But there are multiple people in the same room. I assume that the Montgomery County, Maryland idea for a, investment, housing investment bank type thing is not gonna be feasible anytime soon here.
So we did some, Katie and I did some look earlier, like late last year, early this year, and I mean, we are talking like big dollars, so we realized like trying to do it all at the local level probably wasn't super feasible. But we did at least get confirmation that it's technically legal for counties to bond, for such a thing, just to know like legally, like we're not exploring something we can't actually help with, directly. But the other kind of the newer wrinkles that are happening is that because of Omicron, there's been a real like state focus on the central New York area. And so their center state CEO folks should be rolling out any day now a local fund that's going to serve kind of the Syracuse region. But then there's I think the governor had proposed like kind of a statewide, I forget what she called it, but kind of revolving housing loan fund. And so, but I think with everything that's happened, I think it's been scaled back. And I think what that scale back means is that they're going to concentrate on the 6 central New York counties, which unfortunately stops at Portland. So my wish list is that if we've got really good, really fresh data, everybody at the state knows that we've got a serious affordability challenge, that that we can line our ducks up to make a case if there's any way to kind of ride coattails or try to convince somebody to expand territory a little bit or things like that. The Southern Tier 8 organization's also working on a study, and they have talked about trying to do some kind of like Southern Tier loan. I don't know if that's going to be as successful, but they are a pipeline for Appalachian Regional Commission money. So I think they're, potential, but we are really committed to what can we implement out of this study. So feasible, and it'll be nice because I think back when Cornell had their town gown conference, they had Center State had just released their RFP to get a CDFI to like manage their program. So it'll be kind of the way we've always helped other communities with the Community Housing Development Fund information and say, take all of our information, like if it's helpful, use it. I'm hoping that there'll be kind of some of that sharing once the state makes things public, so that we can not all reinvent wheels, but see like, oh, you did this and you ended up with this headache and wish you had done it that way, or, like learn from each other too.
One of the challenges with the Montgomery County model is that their projects are very cost efficient. I mean, they do 200 to 1,000 unit projects. And we're talking like 22.
Yeah, and they're and they have that is they're also a public developer. So I mean, that to me, that's really exciting. The idea that you could maintain some level of public ownership so that the equity is accruing to the public pocket, not to a private developer that's taking it out of the community. And so you're reinvesting that to maintain your buildings, to build the next one, that sort of thing, which we don't really have that capacity here at this point.
Right.
And I think that's something that wouldn't be 105,000 people putting it together. I think that would be more like a regional state, if you ever had that kind of.
All right, well, it sounds like we have a lot of work to do. And do we have another meeting before the end of the year?
We haven't scheduled one yet, no.
Do you think a early December meeting would make sense? This group? Yeah, we won't do the first Monday at this time. But maybe we can target a doodle or something for the first week in December. Yeah. And promise I'll respond to the doodle. You heard it here publicly. If there's nothing else to discuss, I guess the only thing is if we're making our, grand wish list of reach items, manufactured housing or, community projects around that type of work. And, maybe that's getting the presentation from the group that's working on that.
Compass.
There's a small working group of manufactured housing folks.
We're actually trying to establish a nonprofit where I think Shauna was occasionally meeting
Yeah.
with them.
I've met with them a few
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
Well, I'm meeting with them this week to talk about GIS stuff, so.
Yeah, maybe that's something we can have conversation here if you think it makes sense or, I know there's a lot of people, there's not a lot, there's a few people doing a lot of work in that area. And it would be nice to provide them with a stage or an outlet to sort of share their work and get their message out.
Yeah. So they put in a grant application and they're looking, assuming that's funded, I think it was to the park, to hire someone that would do some more kind of data crunching. I can reach out to them and ask if I'm not sure they're at a point where they would want to do a presentation. I think they may be working towards that, but.
Yeah.
I can reach out.
Yeah, so sometime next year we can slot them in.
Yeah.
As we look to 2026.
Will say, I think one thing we really heard when Ellie and I talked with the municipalities, and I think also carries through to the manufactured housing to some extent, is that frustrated because key development areas, they're in private hands. And so if you've got somebody that the carrying costs of just sitting because you think it's only getting more valuable by the day, and you don't want to let go to somebody who actually could carry a project forward, that's a struggle. I think some of both municipalities have then went to like private.
Yeah. All right, if there's nothing else on the list, it's 11:52. Stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ina.
There's a,
There's
there's a bill in both the Assembly and the
Last year,
Senate
I saw the
states
or like
to create a
Wow. They'll have to have a permanent else.
a housing development authority for the state,
when we got the new.
which could either spend tax money if the state makes that available or
On her rich.
or
I'm like,
issue
there's so many,
bonds.
but that.
and, tax exempt bonds
With full disclosure. And so-
for building
Shocking.
Telling this, no.
mixed income housing
We look at as bigger than.
with a lot of
They're like.
on how it has to be used
50,000 and I.
to meet
To address that.
environmental standards, and the residents have to have a role in managing it.
Yeah, so they were like,
Sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact,
I think I just create like a.
there's a little committee of 4 of us in DS.
Well, like geographically, but he'll.
Working, trying to get some, Anna Kellis has,
So we're like.
has sponsored it.
You know,
Leah Webb has not yet,
Have anyone.
not yet sponsored it.
So we were kind of.
Get her, gotta get rid of single staircase. I know Anna,
I do think it would be a huge benefit.
What's the other thing?
single staircase.
It's
You know what that is?
No, I don't.
Can't do.
You know, old buildings are allowed to only have a single staircase, so that's why you get those beautiful staircases where you can like go all the way down through the building.
Yeah.
Modern fire codes require 2 staircases,
Uh-huh.
and that has forced buildings to have this like hallway design.
Yeah.
That is,
So I just,
more expensive, less aesthetically pleasing, doesn't fit as many units, and makes things more expensive. So more recent data has shown that that style of building
Really does feel.
doesn't really improve safety that much.
that up in
Having to
the.
de-legalize single staircase
Public
buildings,
health entity.
Oh, that's
kind of like a small thing to
Yes.
improve
Shut us down.
affordability.
Make people live
Yeah.
with that.
No, like.
We had a lot to do.
Okay.
Just.
Yeah.
That, are we, demanding part? Well.
I know.
Thanks,
Well,
everyone.
and then I was like, if that's happening, bye, good to see you. If that's happening at. Like, I don't even want to think about what.
Yeah, let me,
And we can,
that would be good.
Yeah, wow.
let me know,
Okay.
whenever, and we can
Yeah,
No.
for Wednesday.
Neighbors are only one in the city. and
Right.
We know that that's.
Thank you. Sorry, I would have.
Doesn't want any program. And then it's-
I know.
I was charged.
Compliant water.
I could.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we're lucky in that we're on.
I saw you writing down. So you know what?
It's not the
All right, thank you.
There's gonna be a time when she's gonna wanna try to sell. Her children don't want her to be involved in that. So
But I think there's the notice period.
No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Take
Good
care.
to see you, Greg.
Yeah.
Because it was I forget the name of it, the one in Varna. I mean, I don't know if the sale's gone through, but they had to do the notice period.
Look at
There were
demographics.
folks like, hey, what can we do? And it's like, I mean, I think it's Varna. I think that one with that had like a lot of grad student postdoc families and.
Wow. That's a real
And
challenge.
like years and years and years ago, we talked with Pastone is kind of the entity doing the Rocks, the resident owned community initiative in New York State. Very successful, and they had, I think, one potential years ago down here, and it didn't work out. And realistically, when they talked about like you need a lot of like a high proportion of the units to be owned. Not rented, which is often problematic, especially in the parks that are closer to Cornell. It's a lot of rentals not.
Some of that is also that I see more housing units.
And you gotta have like, you know, a community that's ready to like
That's
come together, and they'll provide like support, organizational structure, kind of. But,
Yeah, I know.
and you have to have a willing owner who doesn't just want to sell to the highest bidder, which is also a rarity.
Right.
It's like you need all of these
Our
unicorns.
city zoning for Nate's is it allows one use, manufactured housing.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't know, at the end of the day, if that's gonna be really a way to defend it and keep it in place, but it's a really acceptable problem. It's like there's some real.
And it's so much of the naturally occurring affordable housing across New York State, honestly.
Timber commune, and then you say,
So if you start,
he tells you about the people who are right.
it's like how much longer
They
can
do-
you manage
they do
these
also have-
systems? Stuff.
So you can see.
And infrastructure is so expensive. It's just like.
Right,
Yeah.
it doesn't make it easier, especially when you have income limited.
And often the parks are in places that just make it. so-
Probably should not have been.
Yeah, and they're often in floodplains. Yeah, it's kind of a perfect mess.
We know there was something, 40 seems like a higher number than that, but not the number of.
Yeah, I don't know what the average size
You're right.
is, but they're little, I think there are a lot of like
Frustrating as it's-
pocket kind of sized ones where it's not really that. many units, but
Not
kind
make
of.
you think that
It
it
takes-
shouldn't allow.
This person mostly has to use 5
Well, I guess it would have to be full compliance.
And these days, like with septic requirements and all that stuff is really different. You've just got like these situations where it's like,
Projects, right?
yeah, they never would be permitted today. but,
Right, and
yeah.
Nate's is prohibited from expanding, they have like, 6 lots they could have developed, but they create the standards for that, so.
There is a 1 year.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like you need like a statewide program, because I have to think you're talking about, like, I can't even imagine how many thousands of units across New York State, that I don't think are in any better shape. And really like CDBG, at least for non-entitlement communities, it's focused on, it's gotta be on an owned lot, so they won't touch any homes typically. In the parks, so it's like they wanna help a low income homeowner, so like they'll do, sort of replacements and stuff like that, but then we ran into the problem.
Yeah.
They did a manufactured home program before my time at the county. And it jacked everybody's, this was probably like early 2000s, I think. It still increased people's
Thanks
taxes.
so much, David.
Oh, verbally, it was.
To go from rental to ownership?
No, so this was like basically
I've worked with Russ,
people home replacement on an
as the
lot, but
director of,
homeowners and
Oh, right.
they were our council.
off.
Okay.
The
This is awesome.
Unit.
Still went up then?
But now your properties.
Yep.
Because you've got this brand new manufactured property where you have this 1962.
Exactly.
Busted out, inefficient.
As if you want to change.
So that increased their taxes.
Oh, yeah.
And people apparently fought the county because they thought they didn't ultimately, when the new unit arrived, of course, the new unit arrived before the old unit went away. And then they didn't want you to take the unit because they're like, now I've got 2 houses. You're like, no, we told the state we're taking we're properly disposing of all the asbestos.
Goodness.
It's complicated.
All right, let's see.
But it seems like